This morning, we continue our summer sermon series, say that 5 times fast, on the Beatitudes. And today we will focus on Matthew chapter 5, verse 4. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. This is the word of the Lord. As the famous quote attributed to Ben Franklin goes, "In this world, nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes." Loss, such as a death, is a nearly universal experience, and along with that loss is the subsequent bereavement stemming from losing something or someone. The wisdom writings of the Old Testament put it this way in the book of Ecclesiastes: "For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born, and a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to break down, and a time to build up, a time to weep, and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance." Loss is a natural part of life, and the losses we experience in life, whether they be death or divorce, the loss of a job, the loss of physical or cognitive abilities through illness or injury, estrangement from family, miscarriage, and many more, bring us to a place of mourning in our lives. The universal and certain experience of loss in life makes today's beatitude one that each of us can be sure to claim, whether now or at some point in our lives. Ironically enough, even as Jesus promises comfort to those who mourn, dealing with grief, whether our own or someone else's, often makes us quite uncomfortable. The prevailing thought seems to be, well, some time for mourning is appropriate. But after a while, you've got to pull yourself up together and move on. We get very good at denying our own grief and emotions around loss as we soldier on. And out of that denial, when we witness others' grief, it perhaps hits a little too close to home, as we are reminded of the tenuousness of our own lives and just how close each of us are to our own tragedies. And in those times, even with the best of intentions, we struggle to find the right words, and it's hard to know what the right thing to do is. And we don't always get it right. We grasp for worn-out cliches and silver lining platitudes, no matter how true they may be. Well, at least you can try to get pregnant again. You can always find another job. Everything happens for a reason. Cheer up. Your mother wouldn't want you to be sad. He's in a better place. Or, I know how you feel. Now, I'm going to guess that we've maybe all said things like this, and it's because we genuinely want to comfort others, and we want to be there in their time of need. There's a scene in the movie Steel Magnolias that I think illustrates well the do's and don'ts of grief and of comforting others. If you haven't seen this movie, for whatever strange reason, you should know that it centers around the lives and the friendship between 6 women: Malin, her daughter Shelby, Truvy, Clary, Annelle, and Ouisa, in the fictional Chickapin parish of Louisiana. And I'm sorry I'm going to have to spoil the ending for you, but it ends with Shelby's death. And at her funeral, Annelle says, "Miss Malin, it should make you feel a lot better that Shelby is with her king." To which Malin retorts, "Yes, Annelle, I guess it should. You go on ahead. I'm sorry if I don't feel like it. I guess I'm a little selfish. I'd rather have her here." This moment that is shared between this tight-knit group of friends continues on, with Malin finally breaking her perfectly held composure as she desperately tries to make sense of her daughter's death, crying out, "Oh God, I want to know why." The whole scene builds up to this moment where Malin is shouting that she just wants to hit somebody until they hurt as bad as she does. And Clary grabs Ouisa and offers her up as the sacrificial punching bag. This causes Malin and the rest of the women to break into uncontrollable laughter, giving them all cathartic release. Later, when the women are back together at the house, holding those small plates of funeral food, Truvy remarks that her favorite emotion is laughter through tears. They all share memories of Shelby and the ways that she touched each of their lives. In the end, Malin was able to begin addressing her grief and to start actually mourning because her friends were with her, giving her what she needed in the moment, and not shying away from her grief or judging her for it. Although we don't feel it, Jesus tells us that we are blessed when we mourn. In mourning, we are reminded that we are alive, that this pain we experience means that we have loved deeply. One funeral director puts it this way: grief is the tax we pay on the loves of our lives, our habits, our attachments. If you love, you grieve. So the question is not so much whether or not you grieve, but how well, how completely we mourn. Mourning something or someone means we cared, we tried, we invested our time and talents, we hoped. And God does some of God's best work in the darkness of loss. The promise of this beatitude is that God shows particular care for those who are in sorrow. So we can be comforted by God's promises to journey with us in our grief and to not leave us in despair, but to turn our mourning into dancing and to clothe us with joy. Just as we claim this promise of comfort for ourselves in our personal loss and mourning, we can also claim it for a world that is weeping over the disparity between God's kingdom, God's reality, and our present realities. If we are honest with ourselves, we will admit that the world that Jesus proclaims in the Beatitudes is not the world that we have created for ourselves. The Old Testament gives us this great concept of the kind of mourning that goes beyond personal bereavement and encompasses whole communities, even the whole of creation, and that is lamentation. It is a deep sorrow that is expressed by the prophets as the people turn away from God and God's command that they be a blessing to all the nations. God's command to care for the poor among them, for the widow, the orphan, the stranger. Lamentation is the despair experienced by the people as they are conquered by foreign armies and are sent into exile. But even as lamentations are expressed, so also is hope. Hope in God's continued faithfulness despite the people's disobedience. Isaiah in chapter 40 relays a message of comfort to the people, saying, "Comfort, O comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that she has served her term, that her penalty is paid, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint and strengthens the powerless. Even youths will faint and be weary, and the young will fall exhausted. But those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." The prophet Jeremiah reflects a similar sentiment as he gives God's message to the people in the midst of the trauma of their exile. Chapter 31 states, "Thus says the Lord, the people who survived the sword found grace in the wilderness. When Israel sought for rest, the Lord appeared to him from far away. I have loved you with an everlasting love. Therefore I have continued my faithfulness to you. I will turn their mourning into joy. I will comfort them and give them gladness for sorrow." Oftentimes, when we experience or when we witness tragedy and loss and the mourning that is in reaction to that loss, whether it is across the street or across the globe, we ask ourselves, where is God? Where is God in all of this? The answer that Jesus gives us in the Beatitudes is that God is with those who mourn. So as we see a grandmother weeping over her grandchild who has been shot in Central City, we can be assured that God is with her. When first responders arrive on the scene of the 5th drug overdose that week, we know that God is with them. When a family reaches our border seeking asylum from violence and certain death, only to be ripped apart from one another and separated, the biblical witness is clear in assuring us that God is with them. When we realize that the Beatitudes aren't just a blessing, that they show us who God cares for and with whom God stands, they become a call to action. The Beatitudes teach us where God is in our lives and in the world. Paying attention to those whom God has called blessed leads us to care for and to comfort those who are mourning, finding empathy in the common experience of loss, and not only for those within our immediate proximity, but for those across the lines of race, nationality, religion, and political ideology. Jesus not only proclaimed God's kingdom in his teachings on the Beatitudes, but he embodied it with his life and in the way that he treated others. Jesus invites us to do the same, to enter into this new way of seeing ourselves and others as blessed by God, and to be comforted, and in turn, to bring comfort. To God be all the glory. Amen.